Tori, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Secret of Nightingale Wood by Lucy Strange. I listened to the audiobook narrated by the author and I really enjoyed it. So this book is set in England between World War II and World War I, and the main character is a little girl named Henry, short for Henrietta, and she and her family have just moved to a new house that they're renting for the summer. And the family is going there because her older brother has died recently and the family still hasn't recovered, and they just need some kind of a change to try to deal with their grief and figure out how to hold their family together. So they get to Hope House, their new home, and Henry's mother is barely holding it together. She's like on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and her father can't deal with it and he goes away on business. So then for most of the story we just have Henry and her little sister Piglet and their nanny and then assorted staff and doctors running around the house and just trying to keep everything together, keep her mother sane, keep the baby all right, and just deal with their grief and try to process things and be a real family with all of this happening. So this was a beautiful story. The narration in the audiobook was amazing. I loved all the English accents. They made the story just so wonderful. And it was just this really kind of poetic story where you watch this girl wander around this new home and the surrounding wood by herself and not really know what to do and try to figure out how to keep going and help her family. And this little girl is less than 10 years old, and she somehow ends up being the strongest person in their family and the one who's going to try to cobble their lives back together. So the tone of this story was very kind of somber and still and like almost, and very mysterious, almost creepy. You know, you'd have her exploring this house, trying to figure out different secrets about this old house, and she would go into Nightingale Wood, which was right by the house, and kind of try to figure out the mysteries that were going on there. And then because her mother is basically having a mental breakdown, you also have lots of elements of like the creepy mental institution. When you picture a horror movie set in an insane asylum, that's kind of almost a little bit of that tone going in there, because the doctors trying to help her mother have some very unique methods. So this book was kind of like a coming of age story, just about a little girl trying to figure out what things she actually can do to kind of help her family. So I'm going to start talking about spoilers now. So if you want to go read this book, read it. I would recommend the audiobook. It was amazing. And then come back to hear my opinions. So this book really reminded me what it felt like to be a small child and to just know that you are completely powerless and feel like no matter what you need, you have to have an adult do things for you. And lots of children like myself are very lucky and have parents or other adults who will do a good job of taking care of them and helping them with their problems. But if a child happens to find themselves in a situation where they don't have an adult to advocate for them, then there's not a lot they can do. And that feeling is just so terrifying, of having no control over any aspects of your life. And that really came out in this book. I also thought it was very interesting. You know, Henry was dealing with a lot of mental illness in her family. Her mother wasn't doing well, and Moth had kind of receded from the world, and a lot of the time Henry was questioning her own sanity because Moth was hiding so much and just kind of creeping through the house and would leave doors unlocked. Henry wondered if she was forgetting things, and it almost did feel like a ghost story, or like Henry might be losing her mind or something at some points, just because you don't know for sure. And so it was very interesting to be in this a very empty feeling old house with no one around. Henry's basically fending for herself and just not being sure of her own sanity. You know, she'd have those conversations with Robert, but it felt to me, at least, like she knew they weren't real, and like he was there and she was talking to him because she so desperately missed him. But it seemed like that was more of like an inner voice, and she knew that he wasn't really there, and she was just talking to someone she wished was there. But at the same time, that made her kind of question her own sanity. This book seemed like it had a lot of themes of, yes, people do need medicine sometimes to help them with things. You do need doctors and science and things like that to help you with when you're sick, either mentally or physically. But it seemed like the book was really trying to help you remember that science isn't always the only answer, and it's important to think about what you need emotionally too. And common sense is called common sense for a reason. Sometimes it's good to stop and think about that and not get so lost in science that you do things like take a baby away from a grieving mother. Like, I couldn't believe, for Henry's mother, she was grieving because her child had died, and their solution to that was to sedate her so she was out of it half the time, never let her hold her new baby, and then forbid Henry from visiting her. So it was like she lost all 3 of her children instead of just 1. The doctor in this book was very obviously the villain, and he was an amazingly creepy villain. When I pictured him, I pictured the creepy old man from Beauty and the Beast who comes to lock up Belle's father and haul him away and just has that creepy look and seems like completely heartless, and that's really how I pictured this doctor. And then I thought it was so funny every time his wife tried to do anything with Piglet. Piglet would just cry and cry, and no one seemed to think, hey, you know, maybe we should not give the baby to the woman who always makes her cry. So just throughout this book, you had this building sense of dread, you know. The family came to the house and things weren't great, and then the father left and things got worse, and then the doctor got more and more control, and then he took away Piglet, and then he took away the mother, and it just seemed like it was getting worse and worse. And it was interesting the way the book was narrated, because you could tell that a lot of the adults making decisions were making very bad ones, and they should have been listening to Henry. But at the same time, you can kind of sympathize with the adults, because Henry is just a little child, and she doesn't always know the right thing. She was confused when she saw the man with the limp and hanging around, you know. She assumed that he was another doctor, you know. She didn't know how to figure things out, and she forgot to lock her mother's door, so her mother was able to escape. And she definitely did need an adult's help. But just because she needs an adult to help her doesn't mean her opinions are invalid. And it was so just heartbreaking to watch her just trying to get any adult to listen to her. And they just completely silenced her and dismissed everything she said. You know, the most support that Henry had in this whole situation was from Nanny Jane, but it seemed like Nanny Jane didn't really know what to do either, and she was trying to be an authority figure, and then she was trying to follow the instructions of the father, who had basically just fallen off the face of the earth, and she was trying to listen to the doctor, even though he did seem kind of creepy, and so Henry basically had to figure things out for herself. And I loved it. In the end, she and Moth kind of teamed up, because Henry was a child who felt like she didn't have a lot of control over her life, and people didn't find her credible and wouldn't listen to her at all, and so she was just completely silenced. And then Moth was someone who the world just hadn't accepted, and she couldn't get on with her life the way the world wanted her to, so it was easy for her just to recede from it and hide in the woods with her cat. And so that it was so great to see these two kind of lost souls team up and be able to outsmart the evil doctors at the end. You know, that scene at the end where Moth goes back to the insane asylum and she stands up to the doctors, and the doctors have said that she's dead. There's no way she's alive. So they have to give her credit, and they have to say, oh yes, you are Henry's aunt. All right, you can take your mother away. And it was so amazing that Henry was finally able, like, she got help, you know. She still couldn't do it on her own because she is just a little kid. You can't do things on your own when you're a little kid. But she was able to get help and actually piece her family back together. She was able to rescue Piglet and her mother, and she sent that telegram, and her father came home, and he was actually willing to listen, and it was good. And they found an actual credible doctor who would really try to help their mother instead of just experimenting on her and not really worrying about her feelings. And then, you know, at the end, the family wasn't perfect. They were still grieving a lot, but at least they were together and trying to make things work again and trying to kind of start living their lives again. And so it was just such a sweet book. And after all of the anxiety throughout most of the book, then when things actually start to turn around, it's such a relief, and it's just so great to watch that. Oh, so one lesson you can learn from this story is if you have a child that dies, don't name your brand new baby after that child. I felt so bad for Piglet. You know, she's named Roberta. No one ever wants to use that name. So then I thought it was great at the end when they decided to call her Bobby, because they have this thing where they do call all their girls by boy names, you know. Henrietta is Henry, and so now there'll be Bobby too, and Bobby seems like it fits Piglet much better than Roberta does. So I like that name a lot. So I really liked this book. I thought it was a beautiful story, and I just really enjoyed watching this family putting their lives back together.